Welcome to the Clandestine Radio Podcast, Season 2.
Good evening, curious minds out there, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of the Clandestine Radio Podcast. As always, I'm your host, DJ Jazwa, and I have quite the episode for you guys tonight. This is one I've been honestly a little bit nervous about doing for different reasons, at least different ones than I normally say that for. This is another of the episodes that I teased way back in the Season 1 New Year's Eve special / Season 1 finale. And if you haven't already guessed it, yes, this is the Native American Spirits, Creatures and Beings episode, if you will, or as I'm calling it, the haunted history of Native American lore and legends. Got a good ring to it, right? Thank you guys once again for joining me tonight, and we are going to endeavor, at least, to uncover and better understand a few of the things that struck terror in the hearts of the early peoples of North America. And I want you to know I do not take this material lightly. Regardless of your beliefs, I would encourage you to regard some of these, at least, with a degree of reverence as well. Because you never know. Maybe there is a good reason that these stories have survived to this day through centuries of oral tradition. Maybe they're all just cautionary stories used to teach the young ones where to go and what not to do. Maybe. But I've got some Palo Santo wood burning in the studio, just in case. So, without further ado, go ahead and pour a drink, grab a snack, and find a warm, well-lit place by the fire as we jump into the haunted history of Native American lore and legends. Part 1, A Long Black Bean. And we are starting off with a banger on this one. While everything I'll be talking to you about this evening strikes some degree of fear in my heart, few do so quite as much as our first character. I chose this one to start with to both kind of ease my personal dread around it and to get it over with, because I figure this one will likely be the most unfamiliar to you guys. Well, some of you, there's also some pretty obscure ones mixed in here too, but I figured this one probably means more to me than it does to you guys. And it's also one that I feel I can say, I suppose as much as anyone, that I feel I may have had a personal experience with it at one time, but I'll probably save that story for the next week's BTR, just for the sake of getting through our main topics this evening. But as some of you may know, I'm actually 1/8 Choctaw, as probably most of you would say it, Choctaw, which is a native tribe that can be traced back several millennia, largely in the southeast U.S., and then later expanding, or I guess relocated to be more precise, into Oklahoma and some parts of Indiana, with some still remaining in the Mississippi and Alabama area. There are 3 federally recognized tribes: the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, and the Jenna Band of Choctaw in Louisiana, predominantly in Grant Parish, if you guys are familiar at all with Louisiana. And that is actually the tribe that my family belonged to, if we trace back the lineage. So, quick history lesson, tangentially related to what we're speaking about in this one. After the signing of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek in the 1830s, most Choctaw were removed to, quote, Indian territory, but some remained in Mississippi and they refused to be relocated. They would eventually split into two groups, with one remaining in Mississippi and the other settling in central Louisiana, and those are the ones that formed the Jenna Band of Choctaw, built around roughly 10 core families that went out there. It wouldn't be federally recognized, for the record, until like 1995, after years of fighting for their rights. Now, that's enough tribal history. I'll spare you the more disturbing history for the time being, because what we're here to discuss tonight is plenty disturbing enough. There's a common legend among the Choctaw, which I feel is as good of a place as any to begin this whole tale. There were two young Choctaw boys who constantly refused to help the tribe with daily chores and work. Their father, however, was well respected within the tribe, so their behavior was frowned upon, but rarely if ever was anything even said to him about it. Their father was understanding of their strong will and their rebellious nature, and would typically allow them to skirt their responsibilities around the camp, so long as they followed one simple but absolutely inflexible rule. Do not, under any circumstance, go into the forbidden forest, especially after dark. Well, that naturally had the opposite effect, only further piquing the boys' interest. They could tell by how stern their father was about this one matter that it was likely for the best to just listen. That is, of course, until one night when boredom and curiosity, that old dangerous combo, would finally get the better of them. So one night, when the family went to bed, the boys would slip out of their beds and sneak into the forest. Surrounded entirely by trees and seemingly endless darkness, the wind would begin to gently blow, rustling the leaves all around them, masking the sounds of frogs croaking in the distance and any other noises they could have heard. What little moonlight could penetrate the thick canopy would quickly become the only guide they had to make their way through the forest. After several minutes of carefully making their way through the woods, the boys would notice a pond just a little ways ahead of them. Intrigued by what they might find there, the pair would begin making their way closer to the pond. Before they could reach their destination, however, they would notice something else, just barely visible in the darkness beside the pond. It was darker than the darkness itself, but they could still make out what appeared to be a humanoid shape, standing about 8 feet tall. The pair would crouch down, squinting their eyes as hard as they possibly could in hopes of discerning who or what they were seeing. It was about this time that two things occurred. They realized that they could no longer hear the wind rustling the leaves around them, or the frogs, or any other sounds in the forest for that matter. Instead, all had been replaced with a deafening silence. The entire forest had seemingly fallen silent. The other thing they noticed was the shadowy creature, which seems to have no face at all, was no longer standing in that same spot. In fact, they didn't see it standing anywhere. Instead of taking this as a cue to head on home, they figured they were safe now and decided to continue towards the pond. Once they reached the pond, they noticed something else, a large log, one they felt certain they hadn't seen there just a few moments ago. About that time, the log began to move, rolling quickly towards them, and before they could react, it would stand up in front of them, revealing itself to actually be the faceless shadow they had seen only moments before. The boys couldn't scream, couldn't run. They were completely frozen with fear and totally unable to resist when the figure reached out with its long claw and almost gently caressed one of the boys' cheeks. Then it took a step forward. The action seemed to be what was needed to jar the two from their paralysis and send them running from the forest at top speed. No matter how fast they ran, they could still see the dark figure every time they would look into the forest, just standing behind that next tree, watching them, effortlessly staying just ahead of them. Finally, the boys could see the edge of the forest and the fire still burning to its final embers, giving off the last of its light, showing their way back home. They started to slow down, breathing a collective sigh of relief that they had made it back in one piece. As one of the boys was forming the words to say, "We did it," he heard a rustle to his right and looked over just in time to see his brother's face drop to the ground as the shadow's pitch-black arm had, in an instant, seized his brother's leg, and before he could even react, quickly dragged him screaming along the ground, reaching and clawing for his life into the darkness of the trees, where the screams would quickly end. The remaining brother, knowing he was helpless to save the other one, or himself, even if he tried, instead made a break for it, running with all of his might back home to alert his father. The elders would all come together and organize a search for the boy along the outskirts of the forest, but would find no sign of him. The father knew his son was lost. He knew that he too was helpless, unable to save him. He would sit down by what remained of the previous night's fire, trying to come to terms with his loss. His remaining son would approach him, scared, confused, angry. "Father, why did you stop looking? We have to save him." His father wouldn't even lift his head. He would simply reply, "He's lost. The Lucifalaya has him now." While several versions of this character exist, ranging from what most would be familiar with as a shadow entity type, much like in this story, or all the way to a being of average height with a shriveled face and long pointed ears that lives in the deepest, densest parts of the forest, stalking its human prey and waiting for hunters to get lost to emerge from the shadows and slither up behind them before calling out in a human voice. When the unsuspecting hunter turns around and faints from fear, this is a commonly associated effect of this entity, it then sticks a small thorn into the man's hand or foot, which curses him and causes him to commit evil acts onto others. It is commonly thought by Westerners to be used as a teaching story, to keep children from wandering off into the woods or staying out too late in the evenings. There are, however, plenty of Chata who still have a healthy and very real fear of this entity, fearing even to utter its name as to not draw it near to their homes. Its name literally translates into long black being. It is also thought by some that the children of this entity have the ability to remove their internal organs and appear simply as small bodies of light seen along the edges of marshes, used to draw unsuspecting children closer so that the entity can feed on them. We would today recognize that phenomenon as likely being something like swamp gas, or something similar to the will-o-wisp, a common myth in Europe. The name jack-o'-lantern, fun fact, actually originated and reference to the will-o-wisp. Regardless if you believe it is just a teaching tool or a myth, to many Native Americans it's still very real and a thing to fear and respect. You'll notice I only said its name one time in this, and that, my friends, was for both of our sakes. Number 2. There are some names we never utter. Several Native American tribes share myths of the same creatures or spirits, chronicled in centuries-old folklore from most notably ones who occupied the American Southwest, such as the Navajo, Pueblo, Apache, and Hopi peoples. It is a legend of an animalistic humanoid capable of shifting its form, one that most tribes dare not even speak of, with a deformed, beastly, vaguely humanoid body, a disfigured face with 2 blazing orange-red eyes on it. The Skinwalker is a creature that still strikes fear in many hearts to this day. Many traditions exist that give various origin stories for this being. Some say that they were once powerful human medicine men who succumbed to the temptation of using their abilities for evil means and became corrupted, leading to being cursed to walk the earth forever in this form. In Navajo traditions, they call it Yi-na-lushi, and it is a type of harmful witch with the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as animals. The Navajo name for it literally translates as, "By means of it, it goes on all fours." There are actually several forms of these beings in Navajo culture. They are never considered medicine men, however, only witches. While medicine men are revered as healers and cultural workers, witches are the antithesis of those values and are seen as evil and a perversion of the good that healers and medicine men do. Medicine men learn of good and evil magic in order to guard against the latter, but to choose to use it is considered to be the behavior of the witch and is seen as corrupt. Navajo are reluctant to fully discuss these beings outside of the tribe, and hesitant to even speak their names, so little of the true Navajo lore regarding them is understood. Most of what has been used in popular culture and media is conjecture at best and largely fabrications of various authors. I'm looking at you, J.K. Rowling. As best can be surmised from what resources do exist, witches are a part of Navajo tradition and, like medicine men, not considered especially supernatural in most cases. These beings are just a particularly harmful version and the most volatile and dangerous. To become one, he or she must be initiated by a secret group that requires the evilest of deeds, the killing of a family member, typically a sibling. After this, the individual acquires supernatural powers, giving them the ability to shapeshift into animals. They then wear the pelt of the animal they're going to transform into, hence the name Skinwalker. Sometimes the skulls or antlers are worn as well, supposedly granting even greater power. The animal is chosen according to the task at hand, depending on the abilities they need, such as speed, strength, endurance, stealth, claws, teeth, etc. It's also believed that they can take possession of the bodies of human victims if a person looks into their eyes. After taking control, the witch can make its victim do and say things they wouldn't otherwise. They are typically blamed for a variety of misfortunes, from crop failures, bad marriages, sickness, sudden deaths, and so on. They're also said to be able to read people's minds, call up spirits from the dead, inflict pain, and are nearly impossible to catch or get rid of. They must continue to kill or they will die. To get rid of one, it is said one must contact a powerful shaman who knows the correct spells and incantations to force the skinwalker to turn on itself. Alternatively, it is thought that you can shoot the witch with bullets dipped in white ash, but it must be in the neck or hand, or some believe they can be set on fire if caught. According to legends, you can tell if you're in the presence of one by their eyes. If you shine a light on one when it's in its animal form, their eyes are said to glow a bright red, while in their human form, their eyes will seem very animal-like. Then again, by the time you've locked eyes with one, it's usually too late to worry about it anyway. Number 3. It came from the waters. Sticking with shape-shifting creatures just a little bit longer, the Inuit people have long spoke of a terrifying creature that lurks beneath the frigid waters. It is said to steal children who wander too close to the water's edge. Perhaps it's yet another teaching story to protect their children from straying off into what is a very dangerous environment. But still, many believe in the existence of the Kayupiuit, or Kayupalik. Forgive me if those pronunciations are not quite spot on. I'm not that familiar with the way that the syllables work in Inuit. Not in my expertise, though. Doing my best with some of these. Often described as having green, slimy-looking skin, long hair, and long fingernails, set upon webbed hands with scales and fins, one would probably expect of a sea creature. It also wears an omotic, which is a traditional Inuit parka, worn mostly by women, said to emit a shrill scream that has the ability to paralyze its victims and the ability to alter its appearance. There are several versions of what becomes of the kids that it takes. Some say they are simply devoured, while others believe they are kept in a stasis-like state and used to fuel the creature's youth and life force. Said to be invulnerable in its natural state, the only way to kill one is when it has transformed into an animal. It is also said that they are identifiable by their eerie humming as it sings from below the surface, and will sometimes tap its long fingernails on the ice's surface in hopes of luring nearby children who may follow the sound all the way into the ice. There are also tales of children willingly being given to this creature. One such tale involved a grandmother and her grandson who were struggling without food. The grandmother called upon the creature to come and take him away, as she knew she could not feed him, and he would be better off there than to starve. Once the tribe was able to successfully hunt again, a young Inuit couple took it upon themselves to bring the boy back. They were able to track it down, and the boy was tethered to a piece of seaweed by the creature, so he could not escape her. They couldn't get him, though, as she would drag him back under the water any time they would get too close. They persisted, however, and stealthily hid until sunrise, when they were able to grab the boy from the unaware creature and cut him free. While this one is probably just a cautionary tale, it's never a bad idea to keep a good eye on those kiddos around the icy water's edge. Number 4. A shared legend. One myth that seems to persist beyond just native tribes and can also be found in the mythologies of many cultures, including Europeans and Near Eastern mythology, is that of the horned serpent. Many of these stories associate this creature with water, rain, lightning, thunder, and even rebirth. They were a prominent element in the southeastern ceremonial complex of North American prehistory. The Alabama people, which are a southeastern culture of Native Americans and part of the Muskogee Creek Confederacy, call it the crawfish snake. Yep, that's real. And they have 4 classifications based on its horns coloring, ranging from blue, red, white, or yellow. Just a patriotic sounding little crawfish snake. Thanks, Alabama. The Cherokee call it the Uktena, which is said to be a great snake, as big around as a tree trunk with horns on its head and a bright, blazing crest like a diamond on its forehead. It has scales that shine like sparks of a fire, and rings or spots along the length of its body. It is invincible, aside from one place, which is the 7th spot on its body, counting down from its head, which covers its heart. The diamond-like crest on its head is said to grant great powers if it is won. However, the bright lights from it is said to daze men and make them run towards it without logic, rather than to fight or run away. Even seeing one asleep is bad, as it is said to mean that death is coming to a person's family. According to what has been written of the Cherokee legend, the first Uktena was created long ago when the sun sent a sickness down to kill the people of Earth. A man was changed into a horned snake and sent to kill the sun, but he failed. A rattlesnake tried next, and he succeeded. The man, now the Uktena, was so jealous and angry about his failure that all the people were afraid of him, so they took him away from the tribe and hid him. In other tales, they are born out of envy and anger, but represent the darkness of the underworld. Legend has it that they live in isolation, in dark places like caves and gorges, or lonely passes in the high mountains. Generations of Cherokee passed on knowledge of possible dwellings so that members of the tribe could avoid them. Serpent deities, including horned ones, pop up in many cultures and ancient cults and date back at least 50,000 or so years. Number 5. Heads above the rest. Now we get into the really weird stuff. Some of the oldest Native American myths come from the Iroquois, a group that dates back at least 4,000 years. Technically, Iroquois is a language, and they refer to themselves as the Haudenosaunee, meaning people who are building the long house, because it was the assimilation of several tribes, and they built like a long lodge to accommodate all of the tribes under one roof, basically, and that's the significance of it. And they're really a group of tribes with a common tongue, native to Canada and later to the northeast U.S. area around New York, following an unsuccessful rebellion that saw them driven from the Quebec area. One of their most terrifying myths is that of the Kenonstatones, also known as the Flying Head, also known as a word that I'm certain I butchered. Given the age of the Iroquois people's culture, the precise origin of the stories wasn't that easy to track down, but I have some idea of what they believe, and I will share that in just a moment. First, let's discuss what this creature is said to be. Typically described as resembling a human head with long dark hair and, quote, terrible eyes, and a large mouth filled with razor-sharp fangs. Some variations also give them bat-like wings that grow from their cheeks. This ravenous spirit, said to be larger than the tallest man and possessing a hide that no weapon can penetrate, are cursed with an insatiable hunger to feed on human flesh. There are several origin stories associated with these creatures, but one of the most poignant ones is as follows. There was once a very harsh winter, so severe in fact that it killed all of the plants and drove even the moose and deer to find other areas to live. Even fishing was impossible, as the lakes and streams were frozen solid, and with it, so were the fish. This would cause a great famine, and whole families began to die off. The younger tribesmen wanted to migrate to find a new home. The elders, however, refused, saying that this famine was a curse put on them by the Master of Life, and it was best to stay put as the journey was madness, and the curse was inflicted on them for their crimes, and if punishment was endured, it would pass, but if they fled from it, The results would follow them forever wherever they went. This enraged the young men, and after a fierce but swift battle, they killed the elders. Then came the task of disposing of their remains. According to the legend, they wished in some way to sanctify the deed by offering up the bodies to the Master of Life. They agreed to decapitate the bodies, burn them, and to sink their heads, bound together, to the bottom of the lake. One of the young chiefs who planned the crime would become entangled in the ropes that they used to bind the heads together, and when they were thrown in, he too would be dragged to the bottom and drowned. The legend goes on to say that from the water came a terrible sound, then bubbles, and a putrid slime appeared over the surface of the lake. From the depths rose a giant winged head, one that would forever pursue the tribe, and killing everyone who was involved in their crime. Let that be a lesson to you. Don't kill off your elders, folks, or else you'll get head. Not the fun kind. Moving on. To number 6. The Ghost Witch. Long mentioned in tales of the Wabanaki, a confederacy of tribes that occupied the lands around what is now called Maine, and still exists to this day, comes the story of the Scottigamouche. Wabanaki, by the way, loosely translates to people of the Dawn Land. Just a little fun fact for you. The Scottigamouche, or Ghost Witch, is said to emerge when an evil sorcerer refused to remain dead and comes alive at night, taking the form of a ball of light. They then stalk the open woods in search of unsuspecting victims which they consume to fuel their immortality, feeding on the flesh and blood of humans to survive. While a ball of light probably doesn't sound that scary, they only use this form to cover great distances quickly and silently. Their true form is that of a reanimated corpse, much like a vampire or a zombie. They are also said to have the ability to camouflage themselves, blending into any background so that they can seemingly appear and disappear at will, allowing them to ambush victims and deal with even large groups by killing them off one at a time. One story tells of a tribal man and his wife who stumbled upon the grave of a dead sorcerer after taking shelter in a grove. The wife was frightful of sleeping near this grave, but the husband, in typical guy fashion, dismissed her fears and her pleas to leave, and went to sleep. The wife didn't sleep well. All night she was plagued by a persistent gnawing sound that awoke her many times, but she would just close her eyes even tighter and fight to stay asleep. It wasn't until dawn broke that she finally sat up, now able to see around her in the light of the sunrise. She turned to ask her husband if he had heard that same sound, only to find that the left side of his body had been completely gnawed away, and his heart was missing. Seeing this ghastly sight, she immediately fled to the nearest village to seek help. The residents didn't believe her at first, not until they went to the grave and saw her husband. Upon digging up the grave, or taking his remains down from a tree depending on the telling, they found the dead sorcerer's face and teeth covered with fresh blood, and the husband's heart still clutched in its long nails. See, during the day, much like with most vampire legends, these creatures appear as just a corpse. It isn't until nighttime that they rise and seek fresh prey. They also retain their magic and are said to be able to also curse the living. It's said that they are drawn by grief and like to stalk unsuspecting victims around funerals or times of mourning. Much like witches and similar creatures in European folklore, they can only be killed by fire. Many native peoples see fire as a purifying force, so it makes sense that it would be a weakness of such evil beings. To kill one for good, you must burn it fully to ash, and then scatter those ashes to the four winds. I guess if you're listening to this at night, maybe it's for the best that you keep a lighter handy. Just in case. Number 7. It came from the trees. This next bit of nightmare fuel is found in stories from several different tribes, and much like skinwalkers, they are so feared that those who believe in them dare not speak their name. Stemming mostly from the tribes of the Pacific Northwest, particularly the Salish, and taking on many forms from tribe to tribe. The Stick people, or Stick Indians, may sound harmless enough, but let me assure you, they are far from it. Accounts vary, and if you go to try and look them up, you'll find descriptions ranging from Bigfoot-like beasts all the way to small elf-like beings, and even things that can appear as a bundle of sticks in a somewhat humanoid form. The last one, I personally find the most terrifying, In the Pacific Northwest region, they tend to be animalistic beings with their own native language, said to sound more like an animal than actual human speech. They primarily hunt and fish to feed themselves and are almost completely nocturnal, keeping to themselves in the forest. The name Stick Indian is because of their forest-dwelling nature, as well as their habit of jabbing sticks into teepees, lodges, or even people sometimes. Said to mostly be pranksters who steal food, clothes, and other things from tribes, and largely not a problem until, of course, they are. If threatened, they become extremely vindictive and will seek revenge at any cost. Some say they also have powers of mental or even hypnotic persuasion and can cause instant insanity. They are also said to inflict dread, confusion, and anxiety in humans, especially those who wander off alone. Many who would disappear from the tribe were thought to have been taken by these creatures as punishment for disrespecting them. Still, other tribes, particularly members of the Tanana Athabascans tribe, from the Nenana region of Alaska. I guess technically less of a tribe, more of an ethnic group, but they were the first people in Alaska. At any rate, they have a much different and far more frightening version of the stickmen. In this iteration, they are eaters of men, particularly children. From a member of this tribe, I found the following account. When the white man first came to settle in that area, a small party of hunters with native guides went deep into the countryside to the marshes, home to many bears and moose. They went along, shooting any animal they saw. The natives were silent, and led the men on, scared to question their violent and wasteful ways. Then one evening, the lead hunter called the party to set up camp and rest. They picked a safe spot in the middle of a great open field so they could see any animals that might approach or try to sneak up on the group in the night. They would dine and then roll out their blankets and go to sleep, leaving at least one to stay awake in shifts to watch for animals. The hunter slept well, that is until he was startled awake by the sound of sticks cracking. This seemed odd to him. Being in a field, he figured maybe the men were just rekindling the fire. Still, it persisted to bother him, so he decided to peek out of his tent flap and take a look around their camp. Through the darkness, he strained to adjust his eyes to see around him. The fire had died down, but still cast just enough light to illuminate some large puddles on the ground. The hunter thought this odd, as it hadn't rained during the night, and so he slowly reached out to touch the nearest one, curious where it could have come from. As he touched the puddle, it seemed oddly warm, and as he brought his hand nearer to his face, he was overtaken by the smell of iron. These were puddles of blood, several, but no corpses. Looking around, he noticed some of his men still sleeping soundly, wrapped in their blankets. Then, to his complete horror, he watched as one of them, still bound up in his blanket, was lifted into the air by what appeared to be many small, moving sticks, and then carried off quickly into the darkness. The hunter's scream would awaken the other men, who all drew their rifles, but none of them knew what to fire at, as mostly all they could see were sticks moving in impossible manners, and blood everywhere. Not knowing how to defend themselves, the men instead decided to flee, but as they ran off together, they were chased by giant animals that appeared suddenly from the tall grass. The hunter, still in shock from all he had witnessed, waited until the rest of the group were being chased down, and the beast seemed occupied for the moment. To finally burst from his tent, he took off running, never looking back once despite the continuous screams of his companions. And then he would run as far as he could, as fast as he could, or as long as he could. 1 week later, it is said that this hunter showed up in Nenana, crazed, wild-eyed, exhausted, and knocking on death's door. He told his story to all who would listen, and then perished shortly after because he was unable to rest without constantly waking up and screaming. The person who relayed this story also added that their father hasn't had an encounter with these creatures once on a hunting trip and has been terrorized by that memory ever since. It's said that these creatures go by many names and show up to people in many forms. There are a few commonalities to their appearances. They typically appear as sticks that blend with the forest until you get too close, but they can also appear as animals, usually described as everything from bears to large deer or even small moose. It can move at incredible speeds despite their awkward and often hunched over on its legs appearance. Often they are white or pale-looking animals who feed not only on the fear that this creates, but also feast on the unwary. According to legend, just seeing one can haunt you for years. but is considered a sign of good luck if they are uninterested in you, because it means that you have powerful ancestors watching over and surrounding you. You will know one is near, because, much like the first entity we spoke of, the forest will go silent all around you. Sometimes they will even speak to you, or each other, in what is commonly described as being a raspy whisper, mixed with the rattling of dry willow branches, an eerie light chattering. To avoid them, never ever camp where the forest is silent, or stick around should it ever become so. And never ever look into their eyes, or you will be driven mad with fear, unable to even move in most cases, and fall an easy victim to their ravenous ways. And now, on to our final one. I guess you could say I saved the best for last, or perhaps I was just dreading this one the worst. But number 8, the Plague of Winter. No list of Native American spirits and creatures would be complete without addressing our next subject. Its common name is unique to the Ojibwe people, but all Algonquin-speaking people have a name for this being, commonly associated with winter, coldness, famine, and starvation. Many native tribes also have legends involving this terrifying being, which seems to be pervasive throughout a large portion of First Nations communities. A towering, cunning, malevolent creature with human-like characteristics in most iterations. One which can cause humans to become possessed with an insatiable hunger and desire for cannibalism. I am, of course, speaking of the infamous
Wendigo.
Tall, with some stories alleging up to 15 feet. Gaunt, and always starving regardless of how much it has consumed. Sunken eyes that can also glow. Some say a fiery red, some say a whitish blue ghost-like color. Its lips are often chewed, bloody, or sometimes completely missing and eaten, which barely hide its long yellow fangs. Some report fur that is tattered. Others say just ashen, sickly-looking skin, typically depicted with horns or antlers like a deer, and with a strong odor of rotting flesh, which is usually the first sign that one is near. The Wendigo has terrorized a great number of native cultures throughout the centuries. Due to its widespread and varied lore, pinning down an accurate origin for this creature proved to be extremely difficult. It well predates the arrival of Europeans to North America as an oral tradition, but the first known written account appears in 1636 in a report by a French Jesuit missionary, Paul Lejeune, who lived among the Algonquin people near what is present-day Quebec. He described a woman who had warned him of an Atchin, which is considered to be a variation of the same creature, just commonly an Inuit word for it, that had eaten some tribal members nearby and would eat a great many more of them if he were not called elsewhere. I wasn't able to find much supplemental information on this quote, so it's difficult to apply much context to what she meant by if he were not called elsewhere, but I found it interesting nonetheless and thought it was worth mentioning. Common to most stories of these creatures is their exceptionally sharp eyesight, hearing, and sense of smell, as well as their superhuman strength and speed, making them a fearsome predator, well suited to stalking and overpowering their human prey. They move effortlessly through even the deepest of snow and across ice with sure footing. Some stories have the creature's origin as once being a lost hunter, whom during a brutally cold winter was driven to cannibalism by his intense hunger and inability to find any other food. After feasting on another human's flesh, he was transformed into a crazed man-beast with an insatiable hunger for human prey. Some legends state it was once a warrior who, call back to episode 1 of this season, made a deal with the devil to save his tribe in exchange for his soul. He was then transformed into the Wendigo in order to protect his people. But when peace ensued, there was no need for such a fearsome creature, and the warrior was banished from the tribe, forced to live as an outcast, one set on consuming his former tribesmen in an act of vengeance. But the more he would consume, the greater his hunger would grow. Typically, it is seen as a cautionary tale against cannibalism, as well as greed. An interesting element to their lore is that it is believed that not only do they hunt and consume humans, but that they also have the ability to possess or otherwise infect the minds of humans, causing them to have an intense hunger that is only satiated, and only momentarily, by human flesh. This part of the lore has given rise to the often disputed modern medical term Wendigo psychosis, a term I first heard in college during an abnormal psych lecture, and I always found kind of interesting. This feeds into the creature's often cited intact powers of cognition and speech, with some depictions having them clearly communicate with its victims and even threaten or taunt them. It supposedly uses these abilities in conjunction with its supernatural powers to control the minds of its victims. Some psychiatrists consider it a syndrome that creates an intense craving for human flesh, as well as a fear of becoming a cannibal. It typically develops in the winter, and in individuals isolated by heavy snow or ice for long periods of time. The initial symptoms are poor appetite, nausea, and vomiting, followed by a strong delusion of being transformed into a Wendigo. They are said to increasingly see others around them as being edible, and at the same time, paradoxically, have an exaggerated fear of becoming a cannibal. The most common response to a person showing signs of Wendigo psychosis, or sickness, within tribal culture was a curing attempt by traditional medicine men. In past cases, if these attempts failed and the possessed individual began to threaten others or act out violently, they were just executed, as death was seen to be the only remedy that prevents the person from fully becoming a Wendigo. Reports concerning this psychosis, while a relatively modern term, actually go back hundreds of years at least. Another account from a Jesuit missionary, recorded in 1661 in a Jesuit relations document, states the following, quote, "What caused us greater concern was the intelligence that met us upon entering the lake, namely, that the men deputed by our conductor to summon the nations to the North Sea, and assigning them a rendezvous where they were to await our coming, had met their death the previous winter in a very strange manner. Those poor men, according to the report given to us, were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all these species of disease, which affects their imaginations and causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men like veritable werewolves and devour them voraciously, without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more greedily, the more they eat. This ailment attacked our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among those people for checking such acts of murder, they were slain in order to stay the course of their madness." End quote. While this is the first written and recorded example I was able to find, I also found numerous cases existing throughout history. Another documented case was in 1878, when a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta named Swift Runner suffered one of the worst recorded cases ever. He was a trader with the Hudson's Bay Company who was married and had 6 children. In 1875, he served as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. During the winter of 1878 and into 1879, it's reported that he and his family were starving, as well as many other families within the Cree Nation. His eldest son was the first to die of starvation, and at some point, Swift Runner succumbed to Wendigo psychosis. Though emergency food supplies were said to be available at Hudson's Bay Company's post some 25 miles away, which is kind of a rough ride by horse, especially during winter and without food for you or the horse, but it's stated he didn't attempt to travel there. Instead, he killed the remaining members of his family and consumed them. He eventually confessed and was executed by authorities at Fort Saskatchewan. Another often cited case is that of Jack Fiddler, an OG Cree chief, for the record, not an original gangster, chief and medicine man known for his prowess at defeating Wendigos. Fiddler claimed to have defeated 14 of them during his lifetime. Some were said to have been sent by enemy shamans, and others were members of his own tribe who had been infected or possessed by the creatures and driven to insatiably consume human flesh. In most of those cases, family members would ask Fiddler to kill a very sick loved one before they finished turning all the way. Jack's own brother, Peter, was killed after turning when the food ran out during an expedition in the harsh winter. Hudson's Bay Company's traders, the Cree and Jesuit missionaries, knew the legend of this ailment well, though often just explained it away as mental illness or superstition. Regardless, several instances of people turning and eating human flesh are documented throughout the company's records. In 1907, the Canadian authorities arrested Jack and his brother Joseph for murders committed while attempting to prevent others from turning. Jack would take his own life rather than face punishment for what he felt were necessary actions taken to protect his people. Joseph would be tried and sentenced to life in prison, where he would die of tuberculosis just before he was about to be released. There are hundreds of recorded cases of this form of psychosis, but they have decreased in frequency over the years. While still disputed by many in the field of psychology, the syndrome has been diagnosed retroactively in historical cases of cannibalism in North America. In his 2004 treatise called Revenge of the Wendigo on Disorders and Treatments of the Behavioral Health Industry in the U.S. and Canada that are peculiar to indigenous people, James B. Waldron wrote, quote, "No actual cases of Wendigo psychosis have ever been studied, and Lou Morano's scathing critique in 1985 should have killed off the cannibal monster within the psychiatric annals. The Wendigo, however, continues to seek revenge for this attempted scholarly execution by periodically duping unsuspected passers-by, like psychiatrists, into believing that Wendigo psychosis not only exists, but that a psychiatrist could conceivably encounter a patient suffering from this disorder in his or her practice today. Wendigo psychosis may well be the most perfect example of the construction of an aboriginal mental disorder by the scholarly professions, and its persistence dramatically underscores how constructions of the aboriginal by these professions have, like Frankenstein's monster, taken on a life of its own." End quote. Concerning the being itself, though, killing or even evading one is said to be extremely difficult. According to legend, it's virtually impossible to escape one. Being hunters by nature, they are highly adept at tracking prey, as well as their superhuman traits of sight, smell, speed, strength, and endurance, and their ability to use the forest and the wintry elements to their advantage. Humans are at a distinct disadvantage against these beasts. They are also said to be able to stealthily stalk victims for extended periods of time, wearing down their prey until they can consume them. It is also said their hearing is so profound that they can pick up on a panicked heartbeat from even miles away and enjoy the torturous game of the chase almost as much as their eventual meal. They will bait their prey, release shrieks and growls, and even use mimicry to call out for help in the voices of friends and family of their victims. Even if you do make it into your home or lodge, some legends say that they are able to unlock or simply knock down doors to enter a home and reach their intended prey. So, running isn't always the best option, as it will just stalk you to your home and kill everyone around. Well, what about standing your ground and fighting back? Typical methods of attack are said to be virtually useless against one, as even if you do manage to injure it, they simply regenerate. Some legends say that the only ways to truly hurt or kill one is to use silver, either bullets or a blade, but that is said to only damage them temporarily. Most legends state that to truly finish one off and actually prevent its return, its heart, which is said to be made of ice, must be destroyed. More specifically, it must be taken and shattered into pieces, all of which must be melted by fire. More modern tales speak of also taking the shattered heart and locking it in a box made of pure silver and then burying it in a church graveyard. Then you must burn the body, blood, and any clothing or fur that it may be wearing to ash completely, and the area of the fire must be left completely alone until the land regrows. Otherwise, there's still a chance that it could return. Wendigo sightings are actually still reported to this day, especially in northern Ontario near the Cave of the Wendigo and around Kenora, which has been given the esteemed title of Wendigo Capital of the World, as well as many other areas around the Great Lakes. Many still believe, both native people and others, that these creatures still stalk the woods and prairies around the northern parts of the U.S. and Canada, but have been spotted or reported all throughout the U.S., even in southern states during particularly harsh winters. While there are still countless spirits, creatures, and legends, and we've really only kind of scratched the surface of this whole thing, I hope I've at least given you a better idea about what all may be lurking out there, waiting in the woods, just out of view. I hope you found this episode informative, or at the very least entertaining. I wouldn't recommend speaking of many of these entities we've discussed this evening. Just in case. I'd be lying if I said a few of tonight's subjects didn't make me a little nervous to talk about. Maybe it's just because I grew up hearing about some of them and was always taught to have a healthy fear, or at least respect for a few of these names. Ultimately, though, as with all of the stories I bring you, it's completely up to you what you choose to believe. I'm simply here to present the information that I have, as accurately as I'm able to, and to let you decide. Just to be safe, though, maybe keep an eye out next time you're alone outside at night. If you see some sticks, or an animal that just doesn't quite look right, or hear a voice that you know that's familiar, and it's calling to you from the darkness, perhaps it's best to just go back inside, or light a fire and stick close to that light, because you never know what might be out there, right behind you, even this very moment. On that note, that's going to do it for tonight's episode. I truly appreciate all of you for tuning in and taking this little journey with me this evening through some of the most frightening spirits and creatures and tales of the native peoples. If you'll excuse me, I've got doors to lock and a studio I need to sage heavily. I'll be back with you, though, next week for a fantastic BTR where I'll get into some personal accounts and talk about some news. And if you have a personal story that you would like to share, be sure to leave it in voicemail, or if it's a longer one, just email it to me at clandestinradiopodcast@gmail.com, and let me know if it's okay to share it with everyone else. I would love to also know what you guys thought about this episode, so if you're listening on Spotify, do me a big favor and just hit up the Q&A and the poll real quick. Above all, take care of yourselves out there, and each other if you can. And I'll talk to you all again real soon on the next Clandestine Radio.